What Bolivia wants is not cocaine, that's an absurdity. What Bolivia wants is to have its natural gas be used, the revenues from its natural gas be used to help pull its poorest people up by their bootstraps. What Ecuador wants is for its oil to be used to help its poor people. That's what Venezuela wants. And Brazil wants to have its Amazon rainforest used to help its people and all of its other resources, and the same for Chile and Uruguay. All of these countries, what they are objecting to is the corporatocracy. It isn't you and me. It isn't the American way. They love this, but they can't stand to have their resources exploited by us. They're not asking us to help them. They're not asking for foreign aid. In fact, you know, Chavez just helped Bolivia pay off all of its debts to the IMF. It's nice to be with enthusiastic people. So they've sent us a very, very strong message, an incredibly strong message. I am so taken by what's going on in South America today, these democratic movements. And isn't it interesting that in our own country, in the United States of America, in recent history, the only people that have really organized and taken to the streets and protested have been the Latinos. They understand democracy. But I want to tell you what happens to these presidents in South America. And I can tell you this as a fact because after Confessions of an Economic Hitman was written, a lot of people came out of the shadows, other economic hitmen and jackals and others, and talked to me and told me their stories. And their stories are going in the book I'm working on now, as well as, they're pretty amazing. I kind of like some of my stories, but wait till you read theirs. Puts me to shame. And I talked to a couple of them who've done what I'm going to describe for you right now in the last few years. Every one of these presidents, when he's taken office, or she in the case of Chile, when he or she has taken office, someone like me, someone with my old job, economic hitman, walks into that office. And this is someone the president knows, seen around, maybe works for the World Bank or a private consulting firm. He's been around, he speaks Spanish, or she maybe. And that person walks into the president's office and says, "Mr. President," or Ms. President in the case of Bachelet of Chile. So the president walks in and says, the economic hitman walks in and says, "Congratulations, Mr. President. And now, I just want to remind you that," and he speaks in a pretty soft voice at this point, "I just want to remind you that in this pocket over here, I got a couple of $100 million for you and your family. Couple of $100 million if you play the game our way. And in this pocket, I got a gun with a bullet. It's got your name on it, in case you decide to keep your campaign promises." Every one of these presidents has had that experience. Chavez has been writing about it and speaking about it. He's read my book and invited me down there, and he's got some amazing speeches where he talks about the economic hitmen and the jackals that have come to him. In the case of Ecuador, Gutierrez was elected president. He ran on a very strong anti-oil campaign, anti-corporatocracy campaign, and the people, and I know Ecuador really well, that's where my godchildren are. And I was there at the time, and he won with a pretty good majority on this anti-corporatocracy platform. He was visited by one of these men, I know who, and within a month he was in Washington, D.C., and when he came back, people were plastering pictures up all over the walls of Quito and Guayaquil with pictures of Gutierrez holding hands with George Bush. George likes to hold hands with a lot of men. Have you noticed that? And he began to cut real sweet deals with the oil companies. And he began to implement the conditionalities that the IMF and the World Bank wanted him to pose upon his people. The people took to the streets. They were infuriated. They had elected this guy, and he's gone against his campaign promises, and they kicked him out. He had to flee to Brazil. Now, my phone was ringing off the hook that day. My Ecuadorian friends were calling me and saying, you know, in a democratic country like Ecuador, when you vote a man in who runs on a certain campaign platform, and he doesn't keep it, he goes against everything he ran on, democracy demands that you throw him out of office. Why don't you guys do the same thing? I don't know. I said, maybe we're not a democracy. So, all over South America, this is what's going on now. And we're seeing the repercussions in many countries, actually. And what I want to say to you is, put yourself in the position of that president. Imagine if you had run on a campaign that you deeply believe in, of keeping down the corporatocracy, of using your country's resources to help your people, and you're voted in, and somebody walks into your office and says something like that to you. Now, that's usually said more subtly. It's not quite as dramatic as I put it, but because I've said that to people like that. And what we really say at that point is, hey, remember what happened to Arbenz of Guatemala? Remember what happened to Allende of Chile? Remember what happened to Roldos? Remember what happened to Lumumba in the Congo? Remember what happened to Diem in Vietnam? Remember what happened to Torrijos? Remember what happened to Noriega? Remember. They get the message. What would you do if you'd just been elected president of one of these countries and someone like me walks into your office and gives you this ultimatum? Here's a lot of money for you and your family, or we can throw you out of office. And you know damn well that if you get thrown out of office or assassinated, the next guy is going to be scared shitless. What's he going to do? So what are you going to do when that happens? What would you do? It's a hard question to answer, isn't it? So what has to happen here is it's you and me who have to do something. It's us here in this country. We can't let that happen anymore. We must defend democracy. And even if we don't like what those democratically elected presidents are saying, and I don't like what some of them are saying, I'm not a real big fan of some of those presidents and their economic policies, I got to tell you that. But I 100% support them as long as they're elected democratically. And most every one of them has been elected by a much greater majority with a much greater percentage of their population voting than happened in this country. They are truly democratically elected presidents. And I don't care what CNN says about, or Fox or anybody else about Chavez. He has won plurality after plurality after vote. He keeps winning. And so we must send a message to our government and to our corporations, to the corporatocracy, that they have to respect democracy. Not just any president, whether he's a democratically elected president or a dictator who happens to support our corporate policies. We must stand behind our principles. One of the other things that's happened in the history of this country during my lifetime, as we've built this empire, is that we have managed to subjugate, to put aside, to sweep under the rug every principle that I grew up believing was what makes America great. And we need to turn that around. The very things that you all joined the military to fight to support, we've managed to subjugate, and we need to change that. So let's talk about how we can do that. Let's move on to the good news. And again, the good news is we know we live on a very, very small planet. We know we have all the resources we need to make this a better world, and that the only way our children are going to grow up safe, secure, and in a sustainable world is that if every child in the world has that opportunity. Right now, we represent 5% of the world's population. We consume over 25% of its resources and create more than 30% of its pollution. And the only thing you can say about a system like that is it is a failure. You cannot take that system to India or China or Africa or South America. It doesn't work. Do the math. 5% of the world's population consuming 25% of its resources and contributing over 30% of its pollution. That is a failed system. We have to change it. We know from history that empires never survive. They always collapse. And when they collapse, a void is created. And more wars happen, and then a new empire emerges, which usually isn't any better than the last and could be an awful lot worse. I sure don't want to see my daughter have to wear a veil. I'm not looking to have the Chinese run my country or anybody else. What we must do this time is something that's never been done in history before. We must turn this empire into something new, something different. We must create a new model. So let's not watch the empire collapse. Let's instead transform it. Let's transform it into something that represents the ideals that our founding fathers envisioned when they wrote the Declaration of Independence, and that so many men and women over the centuries have died for in defending. So many of your brothers and sisters in the military have died to defend those principles. So let's turn this country into something that truly represents those principles and take that out to the world as a model. The way we can do this, and the way we must do this, is to go after the power base of the corporatocracy.